All right, Mantas, let's continue with part 2, the High Middle Ages, which was years 1000 to about 1300. Now, the key developments during this time period, the wave of invasion stops. The Holy Roman Empire, France, and England begin to build their kingdoms. The Crusades begin. Universities emerge. Political stability leads to economic growth in larger towns and cities. Medieval England. During the Middle Ages, German tribes such as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invaded Britain. The name England comes from England, named after one of the German tribes. In 1066, William the Conqueror invaded from Normandy and defeated the English king, Harold II. Harold was killed by an arrow through the eye. The battle has been portrayed on the famous Bayeux tapestry. William was crowned king on Christmas Day. William introduced the strong and efficient central government. During the High Middle Ages, England would develop a parliament and the radical concept that the law applied to the king. It would also wage a series of wars with another rising European power, France. Medieval English towns and villages. There were very few towns in early medieval England. A survey in 1087 counted only 6 outside of London. Most towns developed around religious sites or locations such as crossroads and ports where transport was easy. Towns also developed besides rivers, which could be used for water, supplies, transport, and sewage disposal by simply dumping it into the river. Medieval English medicine and technology. The fundamental assumption in medieval medicine was that people became sick because they had sinned. The church also had banned the practice of doctors examining corpses, so the knowledge of anatomy was very limited. In reality, most doctors were part-time and usually worked as butchers or barbers. The red and white barbers' poles go back to medieval times, red for blood and white for bandages. Cures included the use of leeches to remove bad blood and the drilling of holes in patients' heads to remove bad spirits to treat mental illness. The Church. By the High Middle Ages, the Church was the largest landowner in Western Europe. They also ran the majority of schools, hospitals, and orphanages. The Church occasionally came into conflict with political leaders. The Church usually won these conflicts because it was able to excommunicate leaders it disapproved of, throwing them out of the Church, denying church services to anyone living in the ruler's area, damning them to an eternity in hell, and growing concern about corruption in the church, including the selling of church titles by monks for profit, led to sweeping reforms in this period. The Crusades, 1096 to 1272. Jerusalem is a sacred city to Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Although Jerusalem had been controlled by Arabs since the 600s, the right of Christians to worship had been respected. In the early 11th century, Turks known as the Seljuk Turks seized Jerusalem and closed it to Christians. The Byzantine Empire appealed to Pope Urban II to send knights to take back the Holy Land. There were 9 crusades in total. During some crusades, Jews and Muslims fought together against the Christian invaders. The Pope's motivation for launching the crusades were complex. There was an obvious religious motivation. It also removed the warring knights from Western Europe and unleashed them on a foreign land with the promise of land as a reward. It could unite the church in a time of great division. Urban growth and life. During the High Middle Ages, cities and towns grew dramatically. Europe was more stable. The threat of invasion had gone, and the knights were away on crusades, not warring at home. The Crusades united many European kingdoms, and the movements of large numbers of crusaders encouraged trade. New inventions resulted in improved harvests, for example, water mills and better plows. The population boomed from the years 1100 to 1300. Good times. The Late Middle Ages, 1300 to 1500. Key events: climate change and famine, the Black Death, the 100 Years' War between England and France. The power of the church is challenged, and this really was, at number 5 there, the end of the Middle Ages. Let's break these down. Climate change and famine. During the 1300s and 1400s, the temperature of Europe began to cool. This resulted in violent storms and unpredictable rainfall. Crop yields dropped dramatically. The worst years were 1315 to 1317, and most towns and regions, 10 to 50% of the population starved to death. The famine led to a dramatic increase in violent crime, and there were widespread reports of cannibalism. The powerlessness of the church and kings to deal with the crisis began to raise questions. The event the Black Death from 1348 to 1350. As trade had expanded in the 1300s, Europeans had more regular contact with Asia. The Silk Road was the main route between Europe and China. Tensions occurred along this route between Europeans and the Mongolian tribesmen, known as the Mongols. Italian merchants in the city of Kaffa were besieged by the Mongols in 1345. As the Mongols started dying because of a mysterious illness, they adopted a new strategy, hurling the bodies of the dead over the Italian city walls. The Black Death, the disease killing the Mongols, was the bubonic plague. During medieval times, there was no cure for this disease, and it was spread easily. The Italian merchants returned to their port city, and the disease spread rapidly throughout Europe. Symptoms included large boils, large blisters, called buboes, high fevers, and delirium. Cures such as donating gold to the church, self-flagellation, and using leeches to drain blood had no effect. You can kind of see how it spread, really starting in 1347, southern part of Europe, and by 51 or so, it's just in Scandinavia. It just spread. As soon as people had contact with other people, it spread. Impacts. Black Death impacts. You can see that 1/3 of Europeans were killed. Jews were blamed, leading to anti-Semitic attacks. The authority of the church was questioned. So many workers were killed that the remaining workers could argue for better conditions. The world after the Middle Ages. The late Middle Ages, 1300 to 1500, have been a time of climate change, war, famine, and poverty. Despite these events, there were several reasons the period from 1500 was the beginning of modern Europe. Cities in Italy were rediscovering the influence of Greek and Roman culture. This could lead to a renaissance of ideas from these periods. European nations began to explore the world. Most importantly, Columbus discovered America in 1492. Nations such as France, England, Spain, Switzerland, and Russia were more united and determined to protect their independence. And that concludes the world after the Middle Ages.